The next topic in the land of ES6 that we're going to work on is certainly one of the most popular by far. It is arrow functions. So if you've ever looked at any tutorial for ES6 before, I can almost promise you that you've probably seen some mention of arrow functions. You might have even heard of arrow functions even if you haven't specifically looked at an ES6 tutorial. So we're going to walk through arrow functions, talk about how they're used, what the syntax is, and then most importantly, by far, because this is the part that a lot of tutorials seem to skip out on, we're going to talk about where you should consider using arrow functions, okay? So we're certainly used to writing ES5 arrow functions. ES5 functions using the function keyword. We can do stuff like function A, B, and we can return A plus B. And this would just add two numbers together. So total run-of-the-mill JavaScript function here. You can add 1 and 2, and our result over here is 3. So there's nothing wrong with this approach right here. If you want to continue using functions on day-to-day development, go for it, absolutely. The change that is introduced with ES6 is someone basically was sitting around and they said, you know what, writing out that function keyword all the time, that's a lot of characters and that is just boring as heck. I imagine that's what they said. So the change with ES6 is instead of using the function keyword right here, we delete the function keyword, and on the other side of the argument list, so on the right-hand side, we place a fat arrow instead. And this is colloquially or by convention called a fat arrow. In practice, it is the equal sign and then a greater than sign after it. So it forms a symbol that looks like a fat arrow, but in reality, it's just two separate characters. In case you're curious why it's called a fat arrow as opposed to just like an arrow function, there is such thing as like a skinny arrow that would be just a dash and then a greater than symbol that would look like this. And some other languages, notably like Ruby, also CoffeeScript, make great use of this alternative syntax right here for functions. But we're going to be using, with ES6, a fat arrow or like an equal sign here. So that's pretty much, if we want to leave it right here and want to say, okay, that's arrow functions, we could leave it right here. And we could say, this is the entire feature, this is it. We do not write out the function keyword anymore. We just put an arrow to the right of the argument list. But there are a little bit other interesting improvements here as well. Okay, so you could just, you could just remember this snippet of code right here and be happy for the rest of your days, but I'm going to show you a couple of other very interesting aspects of fat arrow functions. So the first of which is going to be a way to abbreviate this line of code even more than what we've got right now. So the first thing that we're going to do is notice that our current function right here has a single JavaScript expression. So there is a single expression in here, as opposed to doing something like sum equals a plus b and then returning sum. This would be two separate expressions, right? Because we've got one expression to calculate the sum and then another to return it. So whenever we are sitting with just a single JavaScript expression, we can, if we so chose, remove the curly braces on either side and then also delete the return keyword and leave it just like so. So this is an alternative syntax that we can use whenever we have a single JavaScript expression. When we remove the curly braces and the return keyword, we gain what is called an implicit return of the function. Implicit return is just fancy talk for saying that whatever the results of this expression is right here will automatically get returned from the function. So you'll notice that down here I'm calling add of 1 plus 2, and it still is returning a value of 3 over here. And I can make that just abundantly clear by assigning the result to new sum and then printing out new sum. So definitely add is returning 3 right here. If I leave on my curly braces, however, you'll notice that no longer, if I just have like this, if I have just curly braces, even though I've got a single expression, if I leave the curly braces on, I do not enjoy that benefit of the implicit return. So I would have to use the return keyword here, all right? So long story short, this is a rule that, believe it or not, it took me forever to actually just puzzle out on my own because I wasn't, I'm kind of stubborn and I never look at documentation myself. Basically, the rule is if you have a JavaScript expression, you can remove the return keyword, remove the curly braces, and boom, you're good to go. All right, so just remember one expression means we do not have to use curly braces. Now the flip side to that is that if we've got a really, really long expression, like something like a plus b divided by 1 billion or something, and then we pass all of this to divide these things, or something just really crazy, right? Something, just a lot of logic going on this single line. This is still a single JavaScript expression right here, so we could omit the curly braces, but at some point in time, you might choose to use the curly braces and the return keyword anyways, just so that you could get this line of code on its own line. Okay, so if this thing was like really long, let's say something like this, we've got this expression and then this other stuff after it over here, just a lot of stuff on one line, and you start bringing it up all onto the same line like this, you might notice that like, gee, this is a lot of characters on a single line here. So do not feel afraid to break it out to a separate new line and just make use of curly braces anyways if you want it to be nice and clear what's going on. So always want to leave that option open to you. Okay, so that is like kind of step one of arrow functions. Let's talk more about the features around arrow functions in the next section.